Hello there, my sleepy citizens. Tonight, we journey into the shadowed streets of Gotham City, where mysteries lurk and the Dark Knight stands vigilant against the forces of chaos. We bring you tales of Batman, uncovering different sides of the man behind the mask. And as our journey through these stories winds down, a calm ambience of Gotham's streets will carry you throughout the night, bringing you to restful sleep without interruptions from any ads. If you enjoy these tales, please be sure to give us a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what story you'd like to hear next. But for now, let's get cozy and step into the world of Gotham. Fog rolled through Gotham's harbor like a living thing, transforming the familiar cityscape into something from another world. From his position atop the old lighthouse at Miller's Point, Batman watched as wisps of grey mist wound between darkened buildings, softening harsh angles and muffling the usual sounds of night. The fog had been growing thicker each evening for the past week, creating an ethereal blanket that seemed to hold secrets within its depths. The lighthouse itself had been abandoned for decades, its beacon long since replaced by modern navigation systems. But tonight, its weathered stones and salt-stained windows provided the perfect vantage point to observe the strange occurrences that had been troubling Gotham's underworld. 3 prominent criminals had died in the past 10 days, each found in locations touched by this unusual fog, each bearing the unmistakable marks of the phantasm. Oracle, any word from the coroner on the latest victim? Batman spoke quietly into his cowl, his voice barely disturbing the profound silence that seemed to accompany the mist. Marcus Thorne's autopsy confirms the same pattern. Barbara's voice came back, soft and thoughtful. Precise cuts, professional technique, no signs of struggle. But Batman, there's something else. The security footage from the warehouse shows shapes moving in the fog, but nothing concrete enough to identify. Batman had seen the footage himself earlier that evening. Shadows within shadows, forms that seemed to materialize and dissolve like smoke-given substance. The recordings raised more questions than they answered, suggesting something that moved with purpose through the mist, but left barely any trace of its passage. Below him, the harbor stretched out in all directions, its usual bustle reduced to the occasional distant horn of a ship navigating by instruments rather than sight. The fog had transformed Gotham into a city of whispers and half-glimpsed movements, where reality seemed negotiable and the past felt closer than it should. The pattern matches historical phantasm eliminations, Oracle continued, her analysis measured and careful. But there are differences. The victims this time aren't just criminals, they're all connected to cases from 15 years ago. Specifically to the Beaumont investigation, the name hit Batman like a physical weight. Andrea Beaumont, brilliant, passionate, and ultimately consumed by a need for vengeance that had transformed her into something both tragic and terrifying. The phantasm had been her creation, a spectral assassin born from grief so profound it had shaped itself into an instrument of retribution. Batman's enhanced vision swept across the fog-shrouded city below, searching for any sign of movement. The mist seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, expanding and contracting like slow, deep breathing. Somewhere within that grey expanse, the phantasm was moving again, settling old accounts with surgical precision. I'm heading to Wayne Manor, he decided. Alfred's been researching the original cases. If Andrea has returned, we need to understand why, now, why these specific targets. The journey through Gotham's fog-wrapped streets was surreal, like navigating through a dream where familiar landmarks appeared and vanished without warning. The old radio thundered, The streetlights became dim halos floating in grey space, and building facades emerged from the mist only to dissolve again moments later. Even with his cowl's enhanced systems, Batman found himself relying more on instinct than technology to navigate the transformed city. Wayne Manor materialized from the fog like something from a Gothic novel, its windows glowing warmly against the ethereal backdrop. Batman made his way through the estate's grounds, noting how the mist seemed to cling to the ancient oak trees and manicured gardens, creating an atmosphere of profound quiet that felt almost sacred. Alfred was waiting in the library, surrounded by open case files and leather-bound journals that spoke of decades spent in service to justice. The elderly butler looked up as Batman entered, his expression carrying the weight of memories long carefully preserved. "Master Bruce," Alfred said quietly, gesturing to the materials spread across the mahogany table. "I've been reviewing everything we have on the Beaumont case, including some documents that were never part of the official record." He lifted an elegant journal bound in deep blue leather. "This is Andrea's personal diary from the months before she became the Phantasm. Her father asked me to keep it safe, should she ever return to claim it." Batman approached the table, his cape settling around him like protective shadows. The sight of Andrea's handwriting, precise and elegant even in her most troubled entries, brought back a flood of memories he had spent years learning to manage. Her words on the pages spoke of love and loss, of ideals corrupted by grief, of a brilliant mind slowly consumed by the desire for vengeance. "What does it tell us about her current targets?" Batman asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Alfred opened the journal to pages marked with careful bookmarks. "The 3 men who have died were all present at her father's murder. They were part of the conspiracy that destroyed her family and sent her fleeing Gotham. She writes about them specifically: Marcus Thorne, Vincent Kowalski, and Samuel Cross, describing them as wolves who deserve to face their own darkness. But that was 15 years ago," Batman noted, studying Andrea's careful notation in the margins of newspaper clippings. "Why would she return now? What's changed?" "Perhaps," Alfred said softly, "it's not about what's changed, but what hasn't. Master Bruce, Andrea wrote extensively about unfinished business, about justice deferred rather than denied. She may have been waiting for the right moment, or perhaps something has driven her back to Gotham." Batman turned his attention to the other materials Alfred had assembled. Police reports, witness statements, forensic analyses, all painting a picture of a woman who had been brilliant, passionate, and ultimately broken by circumstances beyond her control. The transformation from Andrea Beaumont to the Phantasm had been gradual but inexorable, documented in her increasingly desperate journal entries. "There's something else," Alfred continued, his voice carrying careful concern. "A retired detective named Raymond Walsh has been asking questions about the Phantasm. He worked some of the original cases and has become obsessed, I think would be the appropriate word. He's been contacting families of past victims, trying to establish some kind of pattern or prediction method." Batman's attention sharpened. "Walsh? I remember him from the files. Good detective, but he took the unsolved cases personally. What's his current status?" "Living in the Bowery, operating what he calls a consulting practice for cold cases. His neighbors describe him as harmless but eccentric, spending most of his time in a small apartment filled with newspaper clippings, photographs, and conspiracy boards. He's convinced the Phantasm never truly left Gotham, just went dormant." The fog outside the manor's windows seemed to press closer, creating an intimate cocoon around the library. Batman studied Andrea's journal entries, noting the careful analysis of her targets, the methodical planning that characterized her approach to vengeance, the The phantasm wasn't a creature of impulse, but of deliberate, calculated justice, or what she perceived as justice. Master Bruce, Alfred said gently, there's something else you should know. Mrs. Elena Vasquez has been trying to contact you through official channels. Her son Miguel was killed 3 months ago in what appeared to be a random mugging, but she believes it was connected to his investigation into phantasm sightings. The name was unfamiliar, but Batman's instincts suggested it was significant. What kind of investigation? Miguel Vasquez was a freelance journalist, apparently working on an article about urban legends in Gotham. According to his mother, he had been tracking reports of ghostly figures in the fog, trying to separate authentic sightings from hysteria. She found his notes after his death, detailed observations about patterns in the mist, times and locations where witnesses reported seeing the phantasm. Batman felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to align. She thinks her son was killed because he was getting too close to something. She's convinced of it. And Master Bruce, the timing is significant. Miguel Vasquez was killed just before the current wave of eliminations began. His notes include references to the return of the Grey Lady and specific dates that correspond with the recent fog formations. The implications were troubling. If Miguel Vasquez had somehow predicted the phantasm's renewed activity, his death might not have been random at all. It suggested someone or something was actively protecting the secret of Andrea's return to Gotham. I need to speak with Mrs. Vasquez, Batman decided, and Detective Walsh. If Andrea is back, I need to understand her current objectives before more people die. Alfred nodded, already reaching for his communication device. I'll arrange meetings, though I suspect Mrs. Vasquez will be more forthcoming than Detective Walsh. From what I understand, he's become quite protective of his research, convinced that sharing information might interfere with his own investigation. Batman returned his attention to Andrea's journal, reading her careful descriptions of Gotham's criminal underworld and her methodical cataloguing of targets. Her writing revealed a brilliant mind applying itself to the science of vengeance, treating justice as a problem to be solved through careful analysis and precise execution. Master Bruce, Alfred said softly, there's something else in her final entries. Andrea wrote about you, about Bruce Wayne and Batman both. She understood the connection even then, and she wrote about the choice between love and justice, between personal happiness and duty to others. The words hit closer to home than Batman cared to admit. Andrea had been one of the few people who might have understood both sides of his identity, who could have accepted the necessity of his mission while offering an alternative path. The relationship they might have had remained one of the great unexplored possibilities of his life. What did she conclude? He asked quietly. Alfred's expression carried infinite compassion. Some people are meant to walk dark paths so others can live in the light. She wrote that she understood your choice, even as she made her own. But Master Bruce, she also wrote about the cost of such choices, the isolation, the gradual loss of connection to ordinary human joys. Outside, the fog continued its slow, rhythmic pulsing, occasionally revealing glimpses of Gotham's skyline before concealing them again. The city seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for some resolution to the tension that had been building since the phantasm's return. Batman closed the journal carefully, its leather binding soft with age and handling. Alfred arranged for me to meet with Mrs. Vasquez tomorrow evening. As for Detective Walsh, I'll approach him directly. If he's as obsessed with the phantasm as you suggest, he might be willing to share information with someone who takes the threat seriously. And Andrea herself? Alfred asked gently. If you encounter her again? It was the question Batman had been avoiding, though he knew it was inevitable. Meeting Andrea again would mean confronting not just a dangerous assassin, but the ghost of his own choices. the path not taken that continued to haunt his dreams. "I'll do what I have to do," he said finally. "But Alfred, if there's any chance of reaching the person she used to be..." "You'll try," Alfred finished with understanding. "As you always do, Master Bruce. The question is whether Andrea Beaumont still exists beneath the phantasm's mask, or if the transformation is complete." The next evening brought even thicker fog, rolling in from the harbor like a grey tide that transformed Gotham into an archipelago of isolated light sources, floating in an ocean of mist. Batman moved through this transformed cityscape with careful deliberation, his enhanced systems working overtime to maintain navigation through the ethereal maze. Mrs. Elena Vasquez lived in a modest apartment in Robinson Heights, a working-class neighborhood that had managed to maintain its character despite Gotham's constant evolution. Batman arrived to find her waiting by the window, her silhouette visible against the warm glow of her living room. She was a woman in her 50s, her dark hair streaked with premature grey that spoke of recent grief. When she spoke, her voice carried the careful control of someone who had learned to manage profound loss. "You came," she said simply, opening the door without surprise. "Miguel always said you were real, that you cared about the truth even when others gave up looking for it." Her apartment was modest but filled with evidence of a life devoted to family. Photographs of Miguel covered most surfaces. A young man with intelligent eyes and his mother's determined expression. Batman could see the journalist in his face, the curiosity and persistence that had probably gotten him killed. "Tell me about your son's investigation," Batman said gently, accepting her invitation to sit at a small table covered with Miguel's notes and photographs. Mrs. Vasquez moved with careful precision, arranging her son's materials with the reverence of someone handling sacred relics. Miguel was fascinated by Gotham's mysteries, especially the ones that official sources dismissed as fantasy. He said every legend contained some truth if you looked carefully enough. She opened a folder containing carefully organized newspaper clippings, witness statements, and Miguel's own handwritten observations. The young journalist had approached the phantasm legend with scholarly thoroughness, treating it as a research project rather than a sensational story. He tracked sighting patterns going back 15 years, Mrs. Vasquez explained. Not just the confirmed phantasm eliminations, but reports of ghostly figures, unexplained sounds, atmospheric anomalies that preceded known incidents. Miguel believed the phantasm never really left Gotham, just became more careful about remaining hidden. Batman studied Miguel's charts and timelines, noting the meticulous attention to detail. The young man had identified patterns that official investigations had missed, correlations between weather conditions, lunar cycles, and phantasm activity that suggested someone with intimate knowledge of Gotham's rhythms. "He discovered something specific," Mrs. Vasquez continued, her voice tightening with controlled emotion. 3 weeks before he died, Miguel found evidence that the phantasm had been active recently, not eliminating targets, but preparing, gathering intelligence, confirming identities, planning something significant. "What kind of evidence?" She opened another folder, revealing photographs that Miguel had taken with telephoto lenses. Misty figures moving through fog, shapes that might have been human but possessed an otherworldly quality. The images were frustratingly ambiguous, but collectively suggested purposeful movement through the city's shadows. Miguel spent weeks trying to get clearer photographs, Mrs. Vasquez explained. He developed techniques for penetrating fog with specialized filters and light sources, but the night he died, he told me he had finally gotten the evidence he needed. Proof that the phantasm was not just active, but preparing for what he called the final accounting. Batman felt cold certainty settling in his chest. His notes from that night? Gone. The police said it was a robbery, that his equipment was stolen along with his wallet, but they didn't take his camera, and Miguel always carried 2 cameras, a backup in case something happened to his primary equipment. The backup was hidden in his apartment, and it contained this. She handed Batman a single photograph, the image slightly blurred but unmistakably significant. It showed a figure in flowing robes standing on a rooftop, barely visible through swirling fog, but the positioning, the stance, the way shadows fell across the mysterious form. It was undeniably the phantasm, photographed with clarity no previous investigator had achieved. Miguel died because he found proof, Mrs. Vasquez said with quiet conviction. Someone killed him to protect the phantasm's secret, and now that killing has started again, I think Miguel's death was the first of the new eliminations. The implications were staggering. If Miguel Vasquez had been murdered to protect the phantasm's anonymity, it suggested someone with significant resources and connections was involved, someone who could arrange what appeared to be a random mugging but was actually a targeted assassination. Mrs. Vasquez, I need to ask you to be very careful, Batman said seriously. If your son was killed because of his investigation, then you may also be in danger. Is there somewhere safe you can stay? Her expression hardened with maternal determination. I've been living with that possibility for 3 months. But I won't hide while my son's killer remains free, and I won't stop looking for the truth that cost Miguel his life. Batman understood her resolve, recognizing the same drive for justice that motivated his own mission. Then let me help. Your son's investigation may be the key to stopping more deaths and finding the person responsible for his murder. She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears and unshakable purpose. Miguel left me detailed instructions about who to contact if something happened to him. He said you were the only person in Gotham who would take his research seriously, who would see the patterns instead of dismissing them as coincidence. Batman spent another hour reviewing Miguel's materials, noting the young journalist's insights about the phantasm's methods and motivations. The research revealed a picture of Andrea Beaumont that was both familiar and troubling. A brilliant woman using her intelligence for vengeance, but also someone who had spent years refining her techniques and expanding her understanding of justice. When he finally prepared to leave, Mrs. Vasquez walked him to the window where she had been waiting earlier. The fog outside seemed even thicker than before, creating an almost solid wall of grey that pressed against the glass. Miguel used to say the fog was like Gotham's unconscious mind, she reflected. All the secrets and hidden truths that the city couldn't face in daylight. He thought the phantasm was part of that, something that existed in the space between what we know and what we fear. Batman looked out into the mist, wondering if Andrea was out there somewhere, moving through the grey spaces between reality and memory. The fog seemed to pulse with its own life, expanding and contracting like the breathing of some vast, sleeping creature. Your son was a remarkable investigator, told Mrs. Vasquez. His work may save more lives than he ever imagined. The journey to Detective Walsh's apartment took Batman through neighborhoods transformed by fog into something resembling a maze from ancient mythology. Street signs disappeared and reappeared like ghostly markers, and building facades emerged from the mist, only to dissolve again moments later. It was the perfect environment for someone who preferred to remain unseen, who had mastered the art of moving through shadows and half-glimpsed spaces. Walsh lived in a converted warehouse in the Bowery, his apartment occupying what had originally been designed as artist studios. Batman approached the building carefully, noting the elaborate security measures that suggested their installer took potential threats very seriously. The detective answered his door with surprising promptness, as if he had been expecting a visitor. Raymond Walsh was a man in his 60s, his grey hair neatly trimmed and his clothes suggesting someone who maintained professional standards despite unconventional circumstances. His apartment was exactly as Alfred had described, walls covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and elaborate charts that mapped connections across decades of unsolved cases. "Batman," Walsh said without surprise. "I wondered when you'd finally come looking for answers about the phantasm. Took you long enough." The apartment's interior was a shrine to investigative obsession, every surface covered with evidence and analysis that represented years of dedicated research. Walsh moved through the organized chaos with practiced ease, retrieving specific files and photographs with the efficiency of someone who knew his materials intimately. "You've been tracking the phantasm for 15 years, Batman observed, studying the timeline charts that covered one entire wall. "Longer than that," Walsh corrected. "I started researching similar cases before the first confirmed phantasm elimination. There were patterns going back decades, precision killings that targeted specific types of criminals, always during periods of unusual weather, always leaving minimal evidence." Batman examined Walsh's research materials, noting the thoroughness and professional methodology. The retired detective had approached the phantasm legend with the same systematic analysis he had once applied to official investigations, treating it as a case that could be solved through careful accumulation of evidence. "What's your theory about the current wave of eliminations?" Batman asked. Walsh moved to a section of his wall covered with recent photographs and newspaper clippings. "The phantasm has been dormant but not inactive. I believe she's been studying, planning, waiting for the right moment to complete unfinished business. The recent deaths aren't random. They're part of a systematic elimination of everyone connected to the original Beaumont case." "Everyone? Look at the pattern." Walsh pointed to a chart showing names connected by colored lines. Marcus Thorne, Vincent Kowalski, Samuel Cross, all present at Carl Beaumont's murder. But there are others who were involved but haven't been targeted yet. Judge Harrison, who dismissed evidence in the case. District Attorney Morrison, who refused to prosecute. Commissioner Loeb, who buried the investigation. Batman studied the connections, seeing how Walsh had mapped an entire conspiracy that had protected Carl Beaumont's killers. "How many names remain on the list?" 7, Walsh said grimly. 7 people who helped ensure that Andrea Beaumont never received justice through legitimate channels. If I'm right about her objectives, she won't stop until every one of them faces what she considers appropriate consequences. The implications were staggering. 7 more potential victims, each probably unaware that they were being hunted by a ghost from their distant past. Batman realized he was looking at a carefully planned campaign that could take weeks or months to complete, depending on how cautious the phantasm chose to be. "Detective Walsh, why haven't you shared this analysis with the GCPD?" Walsh's expression turned bitter. "Because half the people on that list have connections within the department. Because the other half are too well protected by money and influence to be touched by ordinary investigation. The phantasm exists because the system failed, Batman. She's what happens when justice becomes so corrupted that people create their own alternatives." It was an uncomfortable truth that Batman understood all too well. His own mission had grown out of similar frustrations with the limitations of traditional law enforcement. The difference was that he had chosen to work within moral boundaries that the phantasm had abandoned long ago. "There's something else," Walsh continued, retrieving a thick folder from his desk. "I've been tracking atmospheric patterns associated with phantasm appearances. The fog isn't natural. It's being generated artificially, using industrial equipment positioned throughout the city." Batman's attention sharpened immediately. Generated how? Specialized fog machines? The kind used for large-scale theatrical productions or military concealment operations. They've been installed at strategic locations, rooftops, abandoned buildings, industrial sites. Someone with significant resources has been preparing Gotham for extended operations under cover of artificial fog. The revelation transformed Batman's understanding of the current situation. If the fog was being generated deliberately, it meant the phantasm had evolved beyond simply taking advantage of natural weather conditions. She was now creating her own environment, controlling the battlefield with the same precision she applied to eliminating targets. "Show me the locations," Batman requested. Walsh unrolled a large map of Gotham, marked with colored pins. Red pins are confirmed fog generator sites. Yellow pins are suspected locations based on atmospheric analysis. Blue pins are sites where phantasm eliminations have occurred. Notice the pattern? Batman studied the map, seeing how the fog generators formed overlapping coverage zones that could blanket entire neighborhoods in concealing mist. The elimination sites were all within areas that could be covered by artificial fog, suggesting careful planning and preparation. She's been planning this for months, Batman realized, installing equipment, mapping coverage areas, preparing the battlefield. "At least 6 months, Walsh confirmed, maybe longer. The phantasm has evolved from an opportunistic assassin into someone who creates her own opportunities. She's not just hunting targets. She's reshaping Gotham itself to serve her purposes." Batman continued studying Walsh's materials, noting the detective's insights about the phantasm's psychology and methodology. The retired investigator had developed a profile that was both respectful of his subject's intelligence and aware of the growing danger she represented. "Detective Walsh, I need you to consider something carefully. If your analysis is correct, then you may be in danger yourself. You've mapped her operations, identified her methods, developed countermeasures. That makes you a threat to her mission." Walsh's smile carried grim acceptance. "I've been living with that possibility for years. But Batman, someone has to remember. Someone has to understand what she was before she became what she is now. Andrea Beaumont wasn't born a killer. She was created by circumstances that could have been prevented. And you think understanding her past might help reach whatever humanity remains?" "I think," Walsh said carefully, "that the phantasm is still Andrea Beaumont underneath the mask. Still someone who loved deeply and lost everything to corruption and violence. The question is whether that person can be reached, or if the pain has transformed her completely." As Batman prepared to leave, Walsh handed him a small device that looked like a modified radio. "This will alert you when fog levels spike abnormally in any part of the city. If the phantasm is planning another elimination, you'll have advance warning when she begins generating concealment." Batman accepted the device, recognizing the value of Walsh's research and preparation. "Detective, if you're right about the remaining targets, we need to warn them." "Already tried," Walsh replied. "Judge Harrison died of an apparent heart attack 2 days ago, though the autopsy showed traces of an exotic neurotoxin. District Attorney Morrison is in protective custody, but he doesn't believe the threat is real. The others have either dismissed the warnings as fantasies or hired private security that won't be effective against someone with the phantasm's capabilities." The fog outside Walsh's apartment had grown even thicker during their conversation, reducing visibility to mere feet. Batman realized he was looking at the perfect hunting environment, a city transformed into a maze, where predator and prey could move unseen, where every shadow might conceal either salvation or destruction. As he prepared to venture back into the mist, Walsh called after him, "Batman, when you find her, and you will find her, remember that she's not evil, she's broken." There's a difference, even if the results look the same. The journey back through fog-shrouded Gotham gave Batman time to process everything he had learned. Andrea Beaumont had returned not just as the Phantasm, but as something far more dangerous. A methodical, patient hunter who had spent years preparing for a final accounting with everyone who had destroyed her family and her faith in justice. The artificial fog generators represented a troubling evolution in her method. She was no longer content to wait for natural conditions that favored her operations. Instead, she was reshaping Gotham itself, creating an environment where she could operate with impunity while her targets remained confused and vulnerable. Batman's cowl device chimed softly. Walsh's fog detector was registering unusual atmospheric activity in the warehouse district. The readings suggested someone was generating concealment for immediate operations, which meant the Phantasm was moving tonight. He changed course, heading toward the indicated coordinates, through streets that seemed to exist in some liminal space between reality and dream. The fog here was so thick it felt almost solid, pressing against him like a living thing that resented his intrusion. The warehouse district at night was already one of Gotham's more isolated areas, but the artificial fog had transformed it into something resembling an alien landscape. Buildings loomed out of the mist like ancient monoliths, their familiar shapes made strange and threatening by the grey shroud that concealed their details. Batman's enhanced vision systems struggled against the dense fog, forcing him to rely more heavily on sound and instinct than usual. Somewhere in this maze of metal and concrete, the Phantasm was stalking her next victim, moving with the confidence of someone who had studied these streets for months. A soft sound, barely audible above the muffled city noise, drew his attention. Footsteps, carefully measured, moving with purpose through the concealing mist. Batman followed the sound, his own movements silent as shadow, tracking what might be either hunter or prey through the industrial labyrinth. The footsteps led him to an abandoned loading dock where a figure stood waiting in the fog. As Batman approached, the mist seemed to part slightly, revealing Commissioner Loeb, now retired but still recognizable despite the years that had passed since his corrupt administration had been exposed and dismantled. Loeb looked nervous, constantly checking his surroundings, clearly aware that he was in danger, but uncertain of its exact nature. He carried himself like a man who had lived too long with the consequences of past decisions, who knew that someday those choices would demand payment. "She's coming for me, isn't she?" Loeb said without turning around, somehow sensing Batman's presence. The Phantasm. After all these years, she's finally coming to collect what she thinks I owe. Batman stepped closer, noting how the fog seemed to swirl around them both, creating an intimate space within the larger grey expanse. "Why are you here?" This is exactly the kind of isolated location she would choose. "Because running won't help," Loeb replied, finally turning to face him. The former commissioner looked older than his years, worn down by guilt and the weight of choices that had seemed pragmatic at the time, but revealed their true cost only in retrospect. "I've been hiding from this conversation for 15 years. Maybe it's time to stop." "What conversation?" Loeb's expression carried the heavy resignation of someone who had accepted inevitable consequences. "The one where I explain why we buried the Beaumont investigation. Why we let good men die while protecting the real killers." why we turned Andrea Beaumont into the phantasm by denying her every legitimate path to justice. The fog around them seemed to thicken, creating an increasingly intimate space that felt separate from the rest of the world. Batman realized they were no longer alone. Somewhere in the grey expanse, another presence was listening, waiting, weighing the value of what Loeb might reveal. "Talk," Batman said simply. Loeb nodded, his voice carrying the careful precision of someone making what might be his final confession. Carl Beaumont was killed because he tried to go legitimate. He had evidence about city contracts, about connections between organized crime and elected officials. He wanted to trade that information for protection, for a chance to build an honest life for himself and his daughter. But the people he had evidence against couldn't allow that. Judge Harrison, District Attorney Morrison, myself, we all had too much to lose if Beaumont talked. So we made a deal with Salvatore Valestra and his people. They eliminated the problem, and we made sure the investigation went nowhere. Batman felt cold anger building in his chest. The conspiracy had been even more extensive than he had realized, reaching into the highest levels of Gotham's justice system. Andrea hadn't lost her father to random criminal violence. She had been betrayed by the very institutions that were supposed to protect innocent people. And when Andrea tried to get justice through legitimate channels, we blocked her at every turn, dismissed evidence, refused to issue warrants, made sure she understood that pursuing the matter would only bring more tragedy to her family. Loeb's voice cracked slightly. We destroyed her faith in everything she had been raised to believe. We made her into something that could only find peace through vengeance. The fog around them pulsed like a living heartbeat, and Batman realized the phantasm was very close now, probably close enough to hear every word of Loeb's confession. The former commissioner seemed to sense it too, his eyes scanning the grey expanse that surrounded them. "She's here, isn't she?" Loeb asked quietly. "Andrea, after all these years, she's finally come home." "Yes," a new voice answered from the fog, feminine, familiar, carrying echoes of the passionate young woman Batman had once known and the cold assassin she had become. "I'm here, Commissioner. We have unfinished business." The phantasm materialized from the mist like a figure from a dream, her flowing robes making her seem more spirit than flesh. The mask that concealed her features was elegant and terrible, transforming her into something that existed between human and supernatural, between justice and vengeance. "Andrea," Batman said carefully, stepping slightly between her and Loeb. "Don't do this. You have his confession. Let the law handle it from here." Her laugh carried bitter knowledge accumulated over years of disappointment. "The law? The same law that protected him while he destroyed my family? The same law that made me into this?" She gestured to her spectral appearance. "No, Bruce. Some debts can only be paid in kind." "And Miguel Vasquez?" Batman asked, watching her reaction carefully. "What debt did a young journalist owe you?" For the first time, the phantasm hesitated. "Miguel Vasquez was unfortunate. His investigation was getting too close to operations that needed to remain secret, but his death was quick, humane." Batman's voice carried controlled anger. "You orphaned his mother, destroyed her life just as surely as yours was destroyed. How does that serve justice?" The phantasm's mask seemed to shimmer in the fog, concealing whatever emotions might have crossed her features. "Sometimes justice requires sacrifice. Miguel Vasquez died so that greater justice could be served." "No," Batman said firmly. "That's not justice. That's just more of the same corruption that created you in the first place. Sacrificing innocent people to protect your mission makes you exactly what you're fighting against. Loeb watched their exchange with growing understanding. She's not the same person you knew, is she? The Andrea Beaumont you remember wouldn't have killed an innocent man. People change, the phantasm replied coldly, especially when the world teaches them that innocence is a luxury they can't afford. Batman studied her stance, her positioning, the way she held herself in the swirling fog. This was still Andrea beneath the mask, but she had been shaped by years of isolation and focused hatred into something that retained her intelligence while abandoning her compassion. "What's your endgame?" he asked. "Whether you eliminate everyone on your list, what then? Do you think killing them will bring your father back? Will it restore your faith in justice?" "It will close a chapter," she replied. "Sometimes that's enough." "And then you disappear again, back into the shadows, leaving behind more broken families, more orphaned children? Miguel Vasquez's mother will spend the rest of her life wondering why her son had to die for your version of justice." The phantasm's mask tilted slightly, and Batman caught a glimpse of something beneath the cold determination. Doubt, perhaps, or the ghost of the empathy she had once possessed. "You think I enjoy this? You think any of this brings me pleasure? I think you've convinced yourself it's necessary because the alternative is admitting that you've become the very thing that destroyed your family. You've become someone who kills innocent people to serve your own agenda." Loeb stepped forward carefully, his voice carrying newfound resolve. "Batman's right, Andrea. I helped create you, and I've spent 15 years living with that guilt. But killing me won't undo the damage we did. It will just create more victims, more people who have to live with loss they don't deserve." The fog around them seemed to pulse with tension, expanding and contracting as if responding to the emotional weight of their confrontation. Batman realized this was the moment that would determine not just Loeb's fate, but the future of Andrea. "But there's another way," he said quietly. "Help me expose the full conspiracy. Use your evidence, your knowledge, to ensure that justice is served through legitimate channels. Give Miguel Vasquez's death meaning by making sure no other families are destroyed by corruption." The phantasm stood motionless for long moments, her mask revealing nothing of the internal struggle Batman knew must be taking place. When she finally spoke, her voice carried echoes of the woman she had once been. "And if the system fails again, if corruption protects the guilty while the innocent suffer, what then, Bruce?" "Then we try again. We keep fighting, keep believing that justice is possible without becoming the evil we're fighting against. That's what makes us different from them." She turned toward Loeb, and Batman tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. "Commissioner, you have a choice. Come forward voluntarily, reveal everything you know about the conspiracy, help make sure no other families suffer what mine did, or face the consequences of your silence." Loeb nodded slowly, understanding flooding his features. "I'll come forward. I'll testify, provide evidence, do whatever it takes to make this right. But, Andrea, can you forgive an old man who was too weak to do the right thing when it mattered?" The phantasm's mask seemed to soften slightly in the swirling fog. "Forgiveness is harder than vengeance, Commissioner. But perhaps it's time I learned that lesson." As the fog began to dissipate around them, revealing the warehouse district in its more familiar form, Batman realized they had reached something that might be called resolution. Not the dramatic justice that the phantasm had planned, but something more difficult and ultimately more meaningful. The choice to break cycles of violence rather than perpetuate them. "The fog generators," Batman said as the artificial mist continued to clear. "You'll disable them?" "The fog was always meant to be temporary," Andrea replied. her voice carrying hints of the woman she had been before tragedy reshaped her, a way to create space for difficult conversations like this one. As natural dawn light began penetrating the dissipating fog, Batman could see her more clearly, still dangerous, still carrying years of carefully controlled pain, but somehow more human than she had appeared in the concealing mist. Miguel Vasquez's mother, he said quietly. She deserves to know the truth about why her son died. The phantasm nodded slowly. I'll find a way to make amends. It won't bring him back, but perhaps it will help her find peace. She paused, studying Batman's face. You still believe in redemption, don't you? Even for someone like me. Especially for someone like you, he replied, because the alternative is accepting that good people can be completely destroyed by evil circumstances. I refuse to believe that. As the fog lifted entirely, revealing Gotham in the clear light of morning, the phantasm began to fade back into shadows, not disappearing entirely, but resuming the careful invisibility that had protected her for so many years. Bruce, she called softly as she prepared to leave. Thank you for reminding me who I used to be. The warehouse district slowly returned to its normal daytime rhythms as the last of the artificial fog dissipated. Batman stood with Commissioner Loeb, both men processing what had just occurred and its implications for the future. She could have killed me, Loeb observed. Probably should have, given what I did to her family. But she chose differently, Batman replied. Choice makes all the difference. In the days that followed, Commissioner Loeb kept his promise, coming forward with detailed testimony about the conspiracy that had destroyed the Beaumont family. His revelations led to posthumous charges against other conspirators and helped establish new oversight procedures designed to prevent similar corruption. Miss Elena Vasquez received an anonymous letter explaining the circumstances of her son's death and including evidence that led to the arrest of the man who had actually killed him. The letter was signed simply, "A friend who understands loss," and came with a substantial donation to a journalism scholarship fund established in Miguel's memory. Detective Walsh found his apartment visited by an unknown person who left additional files about the phantasm case, evidence that would help him write the definitive account of Andrea Beaumont's transformation and eventual choice to step back from the path of vengeance. But Batman, standing once again in the library at Wayne Manor, helped Alfred carefully file away the materials they had gathered about the case. Andrea's journal went back into its protective box, but with a new entry that had appeared mysteriously. A final page written in her familiar hand, describing her decision to choose forgiveness over vengeance, and her hope that others might find strength in that choice. Do you think we'll see her again, Master Bruce? Alfred asked as they organized the files. Batman looked out at Gotham's skyline, clear and bright under natural sunlight, free of the artificial fog that had concealed so many secrets. I think she'll be around, watching, protecting the city in her own way, but as Andrew Beaumont, not as the phantasm. And that brings you peace? It brings me hope, Batman replied. Hope that redemption is always possible, even in the darkest circumstances. Sometimes that's enough. The evening mist that occasionally rolled through Gotham in the weeks that followed was natural and gentle, softening the city's harsh edges without concealing its essential character. And sometimes, just sometimes, residents reported glimpsing a figure moving through that mist. Not the terrifying phantasm of legend, but something more hopeful, a guardian spirit watching over those who needed protection. A reminder that even the deepest darkness could be touched by light. The weeks following the Twilight Sonata case brought an unusual quiet to Gotham's nights. The city's airwaves had been cleansed of Edmund Dorrance's psychological programming, and the natural sounds of urban life had returned. Traffic humming through empty streets, the distant murmur of late-night conversations. Batman found himself listening more carefully to these sounds during his patrols, attuned to the subtle audio signatures that might herald another attempt at sonic manipulation. But as the days passed without incident, his attention gradually shifted to other mysteries waiting in Gotham's shadows. It was during one of these quiet nights that Oracle's voice cut through the peaceful darkness with news of a different kind of audio anomaly. Not the orchestrated madness of corrupted classical music, but something far more subtle, barely audible transmissions that seemed to carry fragments of conversations, whispered secrets that shouldn't exist on any frequency. Batman. Barbara's voice carried a note of puzzlement through his cowl's communication system. I'm picking up something strange on the emergency services bands. Voices that don't match any active personnel, discussing cases that were never officially reported. It's like someone's broadcasting private conversations that never happened, or conversations that someone desperately wants to keep hidden. As Batman changed course toward the source of these phantom transmissions, he couldn't help but notice how different this mystery felt from the Scarface case, where Dorrance had used sound as a weapon of psychological control. These new whispers seemed designed for a different purpose entirely. The collection and dissemination of secrets in a city where information was often more valuable than money. The trail would lead him into Gotham's financial district, where glass towers reached toward the stars like digital age monuments to ambition and avarice. Somewhere in those gleaming heights, someone was keeping a very different kind of ledger, one written not in numbers, but in whispered confessions and stolen secrets. The Whisper Ledger case was about to begin. The first whisper appeared on a Tuesday morning in Robinson Park, chalk white symbols spiraling across the weathered brick of the old bandstand. Commissioner Gordon had called it in personally, not because graffiti was unusual in Gotham, but because this particular arrangement of marks had preceded 3 separate incidents across the city. A purse snatching at precisely 3:17 a.m., a break-in that yielded nothing but a single antique clock, a street fight that began and ended with the chiming of nearby church bells. Batman crouched beside the fresh markings, his cowl's analytical systems recording every curve and angle. The symbols weren't random. They followed a pattern older than Gotham itself, incorporating astronomical calculations with what appeared to be ancient calendrical notation. Someone was using the movement of celestial bodies to predict, or perhaps orchestrate, the city's minor crimes. Oracle, he sub-vocalized, tracing one particular glyph with a gloved finger. Cross-section these markings against historical astronomical texts. Focus on lunar calendars and astrological prediction systems. Already on it, Barbara's voice carried its usual efficiency through his cowl. The style matches several medieval astrological traditions, but there are modern elements too. Whoever's creating these knows both ancient and contemporary astronomical calculation methods. The full moon hung pale in the early morning sky, barely visible against the dawn light. According to the pattern Batman was beginning to recognize, the next escalation would occur within hours of moonset. He stood slowly, studying how the symbols seemed to point toward different sections of the city, a star chart laid out across Gotham's geography. Alfred's voice joined the communication channel with characteristic timing. Master Bruce, I've located some interesting materials in the Manor's library. Your father collected quite an extensive array of astronomical and astrological texts during his university years. Many contain calculation methods that match what you've described. "Bring them to the cave," Batman replied, already moving toward the Batmobile. "And Alfred, prepare the observatory. We may need to dust off some old equipment." The Batcave's observatory had been largely neglected for years, its telescope and calculation instruments gathering dust, while Batman focused on more immediate threats. But Thomas Wayne had installed the facility for serious astronomical work, recognizing that Gotham's position and elevation made it ideal for celestial observation. Now, faced with a mystery that literally written in the stars, those forgotten instruments might prove essential. Batman spent the morning reviewing footage from the locations where previous whispers had appeared. Each site held historical significance. Places where Gotham's original settlers had gathered for seasonal celebrations, where ancient trade routes had intersected, where indigenous peoples had once marked celestial events. The pattern suggested someone with deep knowledge of the city's hidden history. "Master Bruce," Alfred's voice carried a note of concern as Batman reviewed the data. "I've been examining your father's astronomical collection, and I found several texts that reference something called the Whisper Ledger, a supposed method of reading the future through the intersection of human behavior and celestial mechanics. Meaning, the theory suggests that cosmic events don't merely influence human behavior, they can be used to predict it with mathematical precision. If someone truly understood these calculations," Alfred paused meaningfully, "DMB could theoretically orchestrate events to align with astronomical phenomena, creating the illusion of prophetic power." Batman felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to align. "Or genuine prophetic power if they believe their own calculations. Oracle, what do we know about Julian Day's recent activities?" "Calendar Man's been quiet for months," Barbara replied. "Last confirmed sighting was during the winter solstice, when he attempted to synchronize a series of bank robberies with the changing seasons. But there have been reports of someone matching his description visiting the city's libraries and observatories." "Researching," Batman concluded, "learning how to expand his calendar-based crimes into something more sophisticated." The next whisper appeared that evening, just as the full moon reached its zenith. This time, the symbols covered an entire wall of the old Gotham Observatory, the same facility where Thomas Wayne had once studied the stars. Batman arrived to find the building's night security unconscious but unharmed, and the astronomical instruments adjusted to point towards specific constellations. "He's been here for hours," Batman observed, noting the precision of the telescope alignments. "Long enough to make detailed observations and calculation." Oracle's voice carried new urgency. "Batman, I've correlated the timing of all the Whisper appearances with lunar phases. They're not random. Each one corresponds to a specific point in the moon's cycle, and the crimes that follow are timed to astronomical events down to the minute." Batman studied the fresh symbols, noting how they incorporated elements from the observatory's own star charts. "He's building toward something. Each crime is a test, a way of fine-tuning his ability to synchronize human behavior with celestial mechanics." "But why?" Alfred asked through the communication system. "What's the ultimate purpose of these escalating demonstrations?" "Control," Batman replied grimly. "If someone truly believes they can predict and orchestrate human behavior through astronomical calculation, the next step would be attempting to control larger events, riots, disasters, perhaps even social collapse timed to celestial phenomena." He moved through the observatory methodically, noting how Calendar Man had used the facility's own instruments to enhance his calculation. The man wasn't just creating graffiti, he was conducting genuine astronomical research, combining ancient astrological traditions with modern scientific precision. "Master Bruce." Alfred's voice carried a thoughtful tone. "Your father's notes mention a particular text, the Chronos Codex, that supposedly contains the most complete version of the Whisper Ledger calculations. According to his research, only 3 copies were known to exist. One was held by the Gotham Historical Society, and now reported stolen 3 months ago, along with several other rare astronomical texts. The theft was attributed to common book dealers, but given what we now know, Julian Day was gathering his source materials. Batman continued his examination of the observatory, finding subtle modifications to several instruments. Oracle, I need you to track down the other 2 copies of this Chronos Codex. If Calendar Man is working from stolen texts, understanding his source material might help us predict his next moves. As he worked, Batman became aware of a subtle sound echoing through the observatory, a whispered recitation of numbers and astronomical terms, barely audible but perfectly clear in the facility's acoustics. Someone had left a recording device hidden among the instruments, set to play back Calendar Man's own voice as he performed his calculations. "My dear Gotham," the whispered voice intoned, "you think yourselves masters of time, but time has its own mastery. The stars that watched your birth shall witness your transformation. 3 more whispers remain before the solstice alignment, and then we shall see how free will fares against celestial inevitability." Batman found the recording device, a simple digital player tucked behind an antique astrolabe. The message continued. "You seek patterns in my work, Dark Knight, but you search for logic where only cosmic harmony exists. Study the movements above if you would understand the movements below. The Whisper Ledger speaks in languages older than your city, older than your mission." Philosophical rather than simply criminal, Alfred observed after hearing the recording. He's developed a genuine belief system around these astronomical calculations, which makes him more dangerous, Batman noted. A criminal motivated by profit or revenge can be reasoned with, negotiated with, but someone convinced they're serving cosmic destiny. He left the thought unfinished, but the implications were clear. Oracle's research had turned up disturbing information about the stolen Chronos Codex. According to historical records, the text isn't just a collection of calculations, it's a complete system for interpreting human behavior through astronomical events. Medieval scholars used it to advise rulers about the timing of wars, the selection of marriage partners, even the scheduling of executions. And in the wrong hands, someone could theoretically use it to predict social unrest, economic fluctuations, even individual psychological states, if Calendar Man has truly mastered these techniques. Batman spent the following day in the Batcave's library, working alongside Alfred to decode the astronomical references in Calendar Man's whispers. The Manor's collection provided crucial context. Thomas Wayne's notes revealed that he had considered the Chronos Codex dangerous enough to warrant careful study, understanding its methods in order to recognize when they might be misused. "Your father was quite thorough," Alfred noted, indicating pages of careful translation work. "Seems to have been particularly concerned about the psychological effects of believing too strongly in astrological prediction. Here, he writes about the seductive nature of cosmic predestination and its tendency to erode human agency. Meaning, people who become convinced that their actions are controlled by celestial forces may stop making truly independent choices," Batman concluded. "They become more predictable, more manipulable, precisely. And if someone understands this psychological vulnerability, they could use astronomical events to influence large groups of people." Batman felt the scope of Calendar Man's plan becoming clearer. Not just predicting behavior, but shaping it through the power of suggestion combined with carefully timed environmental factors. The third whisper appeared 3 nights later. chalked across the steps of Gotham City Hall in symbols so complex they required photographic analysis to fully record. This time, the pattern incorporated specific references to city government schedules, court dockets, and even police shift rotations, information that could only have been obtained through careful surveillance or inside knowledge. He's not just calculating astronomical events, Oracle reported after analyzing the new symbols. He's correlating them with human institutional patterns, police patrol schedules, judicial calendar, even city council meeting times, building a comprehensive map of how Gotham's systems operate in relation to celestial mechanics. Batman agreed. If he can truly synchronize criminal activity with both astronomical events and institutional vulnerabilities, the crimes that followed were more sophisticated than before. A jewelry store robbery timed to coincide with the night security's shift change, and a minor lunar eclipse. A cyber attack on city financial systems that began precisely as Mars reached its zenith. A series of coordinated disturbances that ended the moment the moon set behind Gotham's skyline. Each incident demonstrated Calendar Man's growing ability to orchestrate events with astronomical precision. But Batman was beginning to detect something else in the pattern. A building rhythm that suggested the whispers themselves were preparation for something much larger. Master Bruce, Alfred called from the observatory, where he had been examining the manor's telescope. I believe I've found something significant. Your father's notes reference a particular astronomical event that occurs only once every 19 years. A convergence of lunar and solar cycles that supposedly amplifies the effectiveness of astrological calculation. When the winter solstice, now only 5 days away. According to the Chronos Codex, this convergence creates what medieval scholars called a temporal resonance, a moment when the boundary between prediction and predestination becomes permeable. Batman felt the timeline crystallizing around him. Calendar Man isn't just building toward a single dramatic crime. He's preparing for a moment when he believes his calculations will become genuinely prophetic. And if enough people believe his predictions during this convergence, mass psychology could turn them into self-fulfilling prophecies. Batman stood in the observatory, looking out at Gotham's lights through the telescope his father had once used to study these same stars. We need to understand exactly what he's planning for the solstice. The fourth whisper provided the answer. It appeared not as graffiti, but as a series of astronomical calculations chalked onto the walls of Arkham Asylum's old wing, the section that had been abandoned after Calendar Man's last escape. The symbols were incredibly complex, filling entire walls with interlocking calendrical systems and celestial mechanics. Batman studied the calculations with growing concern. They described a city-wide event synchronized to the exact moment of the solstice. Mass psychological manipulation triggered by environmental factors that Calendar Man could control. Street lighting synchronized to create shadow patterns, sound systems activated to produce subsonic frequencies, even traffic light timing adjusted to create movement patterns that would reinforce his astrological message. He's planning to turn the entire city into an experiment in collective behavior modification, Batman realized, using the solstice convergence to test whether large populations can be controlled through synchronized astronomical and environmental manipulation. Oracle's analysis confirmed the scope of the threat. If he's gained access to city infrastructure systems, he could coordinate dozens of environmental factors simultaneously. The psychological effect on a population already primed by his previous whispers could create genuine mass hysteria. Alfred finished grimly. People convinced that cosmic forces are controlling their behavior might stop making rational decisions entirely. Batman spent the next 2 days mapping Calendar Man's likely infiltration routes into Gotham's infrastructure. The pattern was disturbingly thorough. Someone with deep knowledge of the city's technical systems had been slowly gaining access to everything from traffic control to emergency broadcast networks. He's not working alone, Batman concluded after reviewing the evidence. This level of system penetration requires inside knowledge, probably multiple accomplices. Master Bruce. Alfred's voice carried a note of discovery. I've found something in your father's notes that might be relevant. He mentions interviewing a young woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, an astronomer who had become convinced that astrological prediction was genuinely scientific. Your father was concerned about her psychological state. Apparently, she had begun organizing her entire life around astronomical calculations. What happened to her? She disappeared shortly after your parents' death. But according to these notes, she had been working on a project to demonstrate the validity of the Chronos Codex through large-scale social experiments. Batman felt another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Calendar Man found himself a true believer, someone with both the technical knowledge and the psychological commitment to help him implement his plans. The fifth and final whisper appeared on the night before the solstice, not as chalk symbols, but as a complex audio-visual display projected onto the clouds above Gotham. Calendar Man had gained access to the city's emergency broadcast system, using weather modification equipment to create a sky-wide demonstration of his astrological calculations. Citizens across Gotham watched as astronomical symbols moved across the clouds in perfect synchronization with the actual positions of celestial bodies. The display was beautiful, mesmerizing, and deeply unsettling. A demonstration that someone possessed both the knowledge and the technical capability to literally write messages in the sky. Fellow citizens of Gotham, Calendar Man's voice echoed from every emergency speaker in the city. Tomorrow's solstice marks not merely the changing of seasons, but the changing of human destiny itself. The Whisper Ledger has spoken through 5 lunar cycles, and each prediction has proven true. Now witness the ultimate demonstration, the moment when cosmic prediction becomes cosmic control. Batman listened from the Batcave as the broadcast continued, describing how the next day's solstice would bring the harmonization of human will with celestial mechanics. Calendar Man promised that those who embraced astrological guidance would find themselves blessed with perfect timing, ideal outcomes, and freedom from the uncertainty that plagued ordinary human decision-making. He's offering them certainty, Alfred observed quietly. In a world full of chaos and unpredictability, he's promising that cosmic forces will provide clear guidance for those wise enough to follow astronomical signs. And creating psychological dependency in the process, Batman added grimly. People who become convinced that their success depends on astrological timing will stop trusting their own judgment. Oracle's voice carried urgent concern. Batman, we're seeing massive spikes in online activity related to astrology and astronomical prediction. Calendar Man's broadcasts have triggered widespread interest in timing daily activities to celestial events. If this continues, Gotham could face a genuine breakdown in independent decision-making, Batman concluded. Mass psychology, manipulation disguised as spiritual enlightenment. He spent the remaining hours before the solstice preparing for what he increasingly recognized would be more than a simple confrontation with Calendar Man. This had become a battle for the psychological autonomy of Gotham's entire population. Alfred worked tirelessly in the Manor's observatory, using Thomas Wayne's old equipment to calculate exactly when and where Calendar Man would stage his solstice demonstration. The astronomical requirements were precise. The convergence that supposedly amplified astrological prediction would occur at a specific moment, visible from only certain locations in Gotham. "The old Gotham Observatory," Alfred announced as dawn approached on the solstice. "The same facility where Calendar Man conducted his earlier research. The building's position and elevation make it the optimal viewing point for tonight's astronomical convergence. And the ideal stage for a final demonstration," Batman agreed. "If he truly believes this convergence will grant him prophetic power, he'll want to be positioned where he can observe and document the entire event." The solstice day passed in eerie calm, with thousands of Gotham citizens altering their schedules to align with Calendar Man's broadcasted astrological recommendations. Traffic patterns shifted as people timed their movements to celestial events. Businesses reported unusual customer behavior as patrons sought astronomically optimal timing for purchases and transactions. "The psychological effect is already visible," Oracle reported as evening approached. "People are becoming dependent on external timing cues rather than making independent decisions about when to act." Batman prepared for the final confrontation with grim determination. Calendar Man had spent months building toward this moment, and his psychological preparation was as dangerous as any weapon. Someone who genuinely believed he could predict and control human behavior through astronomical calculation would be nearly impossible to reason with through conventional methods. As the sun set on the solstice, Batman made his way to the old Gotham Observatory. The building was dark except for the dome, where complex astronomical equipment had been set up to track the night's celestial convergence. Calendar Man was there, along with Dr. Sarah Chen, the missing astronomer from Thomas Wayne's notes, now serving as Calendar Man's technical advisor and fellow believer. "Welcome, Dark Knight," Calendar Man called as Batman entered the observatory dome. "You arrive at the perfect moment, precisely as the calculations predicted you would." The dome was filled with charts, calculations, and astronomical instruments, all focused on tracking the night's convergence. Dr. Chen worked methodically at a complex array of computers, monitoring celestial positions with scientific precision while maintaining the fervid expression of a true believer. "Julian," Batman said quietly, using Calendar Man's real name deliberately, "you've convinced yourself that human behavior can be predicted through astronomical calculation, but prediction isn't the same as control." The Calendar Man replied, gesturing toward the monitors showing news feeds from across Gotham. "Tonight, thousands of citizens are timing their actions to celestial events. They've discovered the harmony between human will and cosmic rhythm. They've learned to let the universe guide their choices. They've learned to stop making independent decisions," Batman corrected. "You've created psychological dependency, not spiritual enlightenment." Dr. Shen looked up from her calculations, her expression mixing scientific enthusiasm with religious devotion. "You don't understand the significance of what we've accomplished. For the first time in human history, we've demonstrated that individual behavior can be synchronized with universal patterns. Tonight's convergence will prove that cosmic prediction and human destiny are literally the same thing." Batman studied the equipment arrayed around the dome. Calendar Man and Dr. Chen had created a sophisticated system for monitoring and supposedly influencing the astronomical convergence, but he also noticed something else, subtle signs that their calculations were beginning to show inconsistency. "Alfred," he sub-vocalized, "are you tracking the actual astronomical data from the Manor's observatory?" "Yes, Master Bruce. And there's something Calendar Man appears to have overlooked. The convergence he's been calculating toward. It's not occurring exactly as the medieval texts predicted. Precision astronomical measurement reveals discrepancies in the ancient calculations." Batman felt understanding dawn. The Chrono Codex was created using medieval astronomical knowledge, but actual celestial mechanics are more complex than ancient scholars realized. Precisely. Calendar Man's demonstrations worked because he was dealing with short-term, small-scale events where minor calculation errors wouldn't matter. But a genuine convergence errors wouldn't matter. But a genuine convergence requires precision beyond what the ancient texts provide. Calendar Man seemed oblivious to the problem, lost in his fervent preparation for what he believed would be the ultimate validation of his astrological theories. Dr. Chan's instruments were detecting the discrepancies, but her faith in the system seemed to prevent her from acknowledging their significance. "The moment approaches," Calendar Man announced as the clock neared midnight. "The convergence that will demonstrate the unity of prediction and predestination. Watch, Dark Knight, as the universe itself validates the power of the Whisper Ledger." But as the calculated moment arrived, nothing happened. The astronomical convergence that was supposed to amplify astrological prediction proved to be based on calculations that were centuries out of date. The stars were not aligned as the medieval texts had promised. The cosmic harmony that Calendar Man had built his entire plan around was revealed to be a mathematical illusion. "This is impossible," Dr. Chen whispered, staring at her instruments. "The calculations were perfect. The convergence should be occurring exactly now." "It is occurring," Batman said quietly. "Trust not where and when. The ancient texts predicted it would." Medieval astronomy was impressive for its time, but it lacked the precision needed for calculations this complex. Calendar Man's expression shifted from triumph to confusion to desperate denial. "No, the Whisper Ledger has been accurate for months. Every prediction, every demonstration was based on short-term calculations where small errors didn't matter," Batman explained gently. "But this convergence required precision beyond what your source texts could provide. You've been building toward a moment that exists only in outdated astronomical calculations." The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Dr. Chen stared at her instruments as they confirmed that the cosmic event she had dedicated her life to proving was based on flawed mathematics. Calendar Man's entire worldview, his belief that human behavior could be controlled through astronomical prediction, crumbled as the universe failed to validate his theories at the crucial moment. "But the people," Calendar Man said weakly. "Thousands of citizens have learned to harmonize their actions with celestial rhythm. That transformation is real." "And temporary," Batman replied. "People who make decisions based on external timing cues rather than independent judgment quickly discover that such systems don't provide the certainty they promise. Gotham citizens will learn to trust their own wisdom again." As if to demonstrate his point, news feeds from across the city showed people gradually returning to normal behavior patterns as Calendar Man's promised cosmic revelation failed to materialize. The psychological spell was breaking as reality contradicted the astrological predictions. Dr. Chen slowly shut down her equipment, her scientific training finally overcoming her desire to believe in cosmic predestination. "The mathematics were elegant," she said sadly. "I wanted so badly for them to be true." "Mathematics can be elegant without being complete," Batman agreed. "And human behavior is more complex than any calculation system can fully capture." Calendar Man sat heavily among his charts and instruments, looking older and more fragile than Batman had ever seen him. "Then it was all illusion? The patterns, the predictions, the harmony between human will and cosmic rhythm?" "The patterns were real," Batman assured him, "but they were patterns of human psychology, not cosmic predestination. You demonstrated something genuinely important. that people will modify their behavior when they believe they're following universal principles. That's not cosmic control. That's human nature. As dawn broke over Gotham, Batman helped process the scene at the observatory. Calendar Man and Rothschild and Dr. Chen would receive psychological evaluation and treatment rather than simple incarceration. Their crimes had been motivated by genuine belief rather than malicious intent. Alfred's voice carried quiet satisfaction through the communication system. The city appears to be returning to normal, Master Bruce. News reports indicate that yesterday's unusual behavior patterns are dissipating as people realize the promised cosmic revelation was based on flawed calculation. Human resilience, Batman observed, watching the sun rise through the observatory dome. People may be influenced by the promise of cosmic certainty, but they ultimately recognize that real wisdom comes from within, not from the stars. In the days that followed, Batman reflected on the case while helping Alfred restore the Manor's observatory to proper working order. The Whisper Ledger had been a fascinating demonstration of how ancient knowledge could be misapplied with modern technology, but it had also revealed something more important about human nature. Your father would have found this case intriguing, Alfred noted as they worked. His astronomical research was motivated by genuine scientific curiosity, but he was always careful to distinguish between observation and interpretation. The stars provide information, Batman agreed, adjusting one of the telescope's focusing mechanisms, but they don't provide answers to human problems. Those still require wisdom, judgment, and the willingness to make difficult decisions without cosmic guarantees. The observatory's instruments were once again functioning properly, capable of genuine astronomical observation rather than astrological manipulation. Batman spent a final evening there, not seeking patterns that might predict human behavior, but simply appreciating the complexity and beauty of celestial mechanics. "Oracle," he said quietly, watching the moon rise over Gotham's skyline. "Any new reports of unusual graffiti or symbolic messages appearing around the city?" "All quiet," she replied. "Seems like Calendar Man's followers have decided to make their own timing decisions rather than waiting for cosmic guidance." "Good. Some patterns are better left unread." The weeks following Calendar Man's capture brought an unexpected quietude to Gotham streets. Batman noticed it during his nightly patrols, a subtle shift in the city's rhythm, as citizens gradually abandoned their brief experiment with astrological timing. Coffee shops that had adjusted their hours to cosmic harmony returned to serving customers based on actual demand. Traffic patterns normalized as drivers stopped timing their commutes to celestial events. "It's fascinating, really," Oracle observed during one of their regular check-ins. "The psychological research shows that people who briefly adopted Calendar Man's timing suggestions are now making more deliberate, thoughtful decisions than before. It's as if the experience of depending on external guidance helped them appreciate their own judgment." Batman found this development oddly reassuring. Human nature, it seemed, possessed an inherent resistance to manipulation, even when that manipulation promised cosmic certainty. The Whisper Ledger had offered an appealing illusion of control, but Gotham's citizens had ultimately chosen the uncertainty of independent thought over the false comfort of predetermined destiny. Alfred had continued his restoration of the Manor's observatory, transforming it from a dust-covered relic into a functional astronomical facility once more. "Your father would be pleased," he remarked one evening, as Batman joined him for routine telescope calibrations. "Always believed that scientific observation should serve understanding, rather than prediction of human behavior." The restored instruments revealed details about Gotham's night sky that Batman had never noticed during his years of patrol. The city's light pollution obscured many celestial features visible to the naked eye. but sophisticated optics could penetrate the urban glow to reveal the same stars that had guided humanity for millennia. It was humbling to consider how many generations had looked up at these same constellations, seeking meaning in their patterns. "Master Bruce," Alfred said thoughtfully as they worked, "I've been reviewing the psychological evaluations of Calendar Man and Dr. Chen. Both showed remarkable improvement once they were separated from their calculation systems and encouraged to engage with immediate reality. Recovery from ideological obsession often follows that pattern," Batman agreed, adjusting the telescope's focusing mechanism. "When people become convinced that complex formulas hold the key to understanding human nature, removing access to those formulas forces them to rediscover more fundamental ways of relating to the world." Dr. Chin, in particular, had proven responsive to treatment that emphasized her genuine scientific talents, while addressing the psychological vulnerabilities that had made her susceptible to Calendar Man's cosmic philosophy. Her case illustrated how brilliant minds could become trapped by their own desire for intellectual certainty, seeking mathematical solutions to problems that required wisdom rather than calculation. Calendar Man's recovery was proving more complex, as his obsession with temporal patterns ran deeper than astronomical calculation. But even he showed signs of improvement, when encouraged to engage with immediate human concerns rather than abstract cosmic principles. The man who had once claimed to predict the future was slowly learning to live fully in the present. "I received an interesting report today," Alfred mentioned, producing a folder from the observatory's restored filing system. "The Gotham Historical Society has been contacted by several other cities experiencing similar phenomena, individuals using astronomical calculation to predict and influence criminal behavior. It seems Calendar Man's methods have inspired imitators." Batman felt a familiar weight of responsibility. Copycat criminals adopting his techniques. More concerning than that, I'm afraid. These appear to be genuine believers who studied Calendar Man's broadcasts and concluded that his methods were valid, despite their ultimate failure. They're attempting to correct what they perceive as calculation errors, rather than recognizing the fundamental flaws in the approach. This development didn't surprise Batman, but it did concern him. Ideas, especially appealing ones, that promised to solve complex problems through simple formulas had a tendency to persist, even after being definitively disproven. Calendar Man's brief success at coordinating criminal activity with astronomical events had demonstrated enough surface validity to convince others that refinement rather than abandonment was the appropriate response. "We'll need to monitor these situations carefully," Batman concluded, "and perhaps develop better methods for helping people understand why human behavior can't be reduced to mathematical prediction." Alfred nodded thoughtfully. "Your father encountered similar challenges during his research years. Brilliant individuals who became so invested in their theoretical frameworks that contradictory evidence only strengthened their commitment to refining their calculations." The restored observatory became a regular part of Batman's routine in the following months. Not for crime-fighting purposes, but for the perspective it provided. A reminder that Gotham existed within larger cosmic contexts that put human conflicts in appropriate scale. The stars that had witnessed the city's founding would continue their patient dance long after current problems had been resolved and forgotten. During one particularly clear night, as Batman calibrated the main telescope while Alfred organized the restored astronomical library, Oracle's voice carried an unusual note of philosophical reflection. "You know, studying Calendar Man's case has changed how I think about pattern recognition in crime analysis. We use statistical models and behavioral prediction algorithms every day, but we're always careful to remember they're tools for understanding, not control. The difference between wisdom and manipulation." Batman agreed. watching Saturn's rings resolve into crystal clarity through the telescope's optics. Calendar Man forgot that distinction and nearly convinced an entire city to abandon independent judgment in favor of cosmic puppeteering. The conversation reminded Batman of one of the case's most troubling aspects: how easily intelligent, well-meaning people had been drawn into Calendar Man's system. The appeal of external guidance during uncertain times was universal, and astrological prediction offered the attractive illusion of certainty without the difficult work of developing genuine wisdom. Alfred's research had revealed that this vulnerability extended far beyond Gotham. Throughout history, societies facing stress or uncertainty had repeatedly turned to various forms of fortune-telling, prophecy, and systematic prediction, seeking external answers to internal questions that could only be resolved through patient self-examination and difficult choices. The irony, Alfred observed as he catalogued Thomas Wayne's restored astronomical texts, is that genuine astronomical observation actually supports the opposite conclusion from what Calendar Man claimed. The universe is far more complex, unpredictable, and wonderfully chaotic than any calculation system could capture. Batman found comfort in this complexity. A universe governed by simple, predictable rules would offer no room for growth, no opportunity for individuals to transcend their circumstances through courage and wisdom. The very unpredictability that Calendar Man had tried to eliminate was what made human choice meaningful. As winter deepened into the new year, reports of Calendar Man-inspired incidents gradually decreased. The imitators in other cities were being apprehended, or, more commonly, abandoning their efforts, as they discovered the same calculation limitations that had defeated their inspiration. Human behavior, it seemed, remained stubbornly resistant to systematic prediction and control. "Master Bruce," Alfred announced one evening as they concluded their observatory work, "I believe we've completed the restoration project. The facility is now fully functional and properly calibrated for genuine astronomical research." Batman surveyed their accomplishment with quiet satisfaction. The observatory that had gathered dust for years was once again capable of serious scientific work, but more importantly, it served as a reminder of the proper relationship between human curiosity and cosmic observation. The stars were meant to inspire wonder and humble perspective, not to provide easy answers to difficult questions. As Batman returned to his regular patrol duties, he carried with him a renewed appreciation for the difference between information and wisdom, between pattern recognition and genuine understanding. The Whisper Ledger had promised cosmic certainty in an uncertain world, but true security came from accepting uncertainty and responding to it with courage, compassion, and careful judgment. The stars would continue their ancient dance across Gotham's skies, providing beauty and wonder for those who chose to observe them. But the city's real guidance would come from its citizens' willingness to think independently, make difficult choices, and trust their own capacity for wisdom, rather than seeking easy answers written in celestial mechanics. In the end, Batman reflected, that was perhaps the most important lesson the Whisper Ledger had taught, that human agency was more powerful than any cosmic predestination, and that the patterns that truly mattered were those created by choices made with wisdom, compassion, and hope for a better tomorrow. And so our tale of Gotham comes to an end. Let the gentle night embrace you as you drift toward peaceful dreams, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, the Dark Knight watches over his city. If you're not asleep yet, we will now play the ambience of Gotham City at night to help you fall asleep. And if you were just listening to our tales, we will see you next time. Good night and sleep well,